One might reasonably expect when one begins Russ as the female man that most of this is going to take place on Whileaway, with Janet, our first chapter, first person narrator, exploring that female utopia. This is the most obvious, and the first part of the novel does spend a lot of time on Whileaway, progressively less as the novel progresses. This is the most obvious science fiction trope: far future, feminist utopia, agrarian, high tech, gene modification leading to higher intelligence, and the women have it totally under control, living a pretty good life, um, exploring their full range of humanity because there are no men around to keep them from doing it. And it's certainly not the first feminist, all-female utopia that's been imagined. Charles Perkins Gilman's Herland is an early example, which has its own problems. The novel doesn't stick with Whileaway for, I suspect, a number of reasons. The first is the fact, I think, the basic narrative problem of utopia, that utopias have, well, no problems. It's hard to tell a story about a utopia because in a utopia, nothing is wrong. Telling a story in a dystopia, as Margaret Atwood will show us very, very soon, is pretty easy because you have a character in a dystopia, you have a character who's got at least one very serious problem. What do you do in this terrible society? What you do in a utopian society, you probably have a pretty good time. You probably live a happy, fulfilling life, and there's not a lot of, well, drama. So Thomas More's work Utopia, it just really becomes a travelogue about this imaginary country, and it's a kind of satirical reference back to what's going on in the writer's own society. We have works like Bellamy's Looking Backwards. It's like someone wakes up in the future in a utopia, wanders around, describes the utopia. It becomes basically, utopias don't really lead to novels as much as they lead to kind of tourist guides of a better world. They become treatises, and this novel does become a treatise, but not in that way. It becomes a treatise by moving away from Whileaway. Utopias are didactic. They tend to be, well, bereft of drama. Now, I should tell you, Whileaway appears before this novel. It is first introduced in a short story of Russ's, the Nebula-winning short story When It Changed, which is narrated by Janet also, and kind of first broaches, this is an all-female society. We've got our kind of badass lesbian female heroine, Janet, who's also not particularly badass for her time and place. Like, yeah, she's the safety and peace officer. She fights duels with people. She's got dueling scars. She's got a wife. She's got a daughter. Um, it's all great. When It Changed is about a moment when that utopia becomes threatened. The narrative in that is that the utopia is imperiled, not in a heavy-handed way. Russ is not a heavy-handed writer, but it is certainly about the danger of losing that utopia. Russ here takes that away. It includes basically When It Changed, spoilers, includes first contact with men, with biological men who have come to ruin everything. Here we don't have that. Russ, for the novel, reverses the trajectory. It is not men from our Earth discovering Whileaway. It's Janet is the emissary to something more or less like our Earth. She is the kind of emissary from the superior culture. She is Genly I, but not a misogynist. And the utopia has to move, Russ moves away from utopia because the utopia is itself relatively static. The problems are right here in our timeline. I'm not saying ours is the darkest timeline. I'm saying ours ain't the prettiest timeline necessarily. In any case, this is where the real world problems that need to be addressed are. Utopias always reflect back on the world in which they're written and the society and its imperfections. They are always critiques more than kind of dramatic stories themselves. They're always critiques of the society and its flaws, the greater society and the audience society and its flaws. So Russ just moves it to that literally. Instead of like, okay, we're gonna go like, and before it can get heavy-handed, like, look at how much better it is in Whileaway, where everyone has a 16-hour work week, and there's no, and there's no male BS, and there's no mansplaining, and there's no sexism, and there's no rape. Well, instead of just using that, becoming too didactically like, isn't this better than our time in America in the 1970s? She just goes to America in the 1970s and deals with it there. Utopias aren't narratively that interesting, so Russ moves away from it. Now, the rest of the book doesn't feel super narrative, but believe me, staying in a utopia and just inside that framework wouldn't be a big help.